Hi there, so today we are going to be looking at impasto painting. Now you can see here that I've got quite an array of different kind of materials and objects here. First of all, I have a piece of canvas board. Now you could just do this on paper, it is absolutely up to you, but this particular image I'm actually going to be putting up on my wall. So I've decided to use this canvas board. It's quite hard, not very flexible, which is great because I'm going to be applying a lot of paint to this and it does need to withhold that weight. So although you can do this on paper, I would strongly recommend that you either do it on very thick paper or cardboard, just to make sure that it can hold the weight of the paint, especially whilst it's drying. You will see that I have already sketched very lightly here the pair of lips that I'm going to be painting today. I've just used a sort of basic orange coloured pencil, just so it doesn't show underneath the paint, but I can kind of see the shapes that I'm going to be focusing on. So I won't need my pencil anymore, I'm going to pop that to one side. So I've got my canvas board here with my sketch. I've got the reference photo that I'm going to be working from. It's just a photograph from Google. And over here I've got some pieces of mount board and some pieces of cardboard that are just cut into these small strips. This is what we're going to be using to apply our paint. So I'll pop those to one side because I'll be using those in a moment. And then here is my palette. So what I've actually done, because the paint that I'm using, I'm going to be using acrylic paint because it's nice and thick and it will dry quite hard with a nice shine to it. I would definitely recommend acrylic paint for this technique. You could use poster paint, but it does not dry in the same way. You could mix poster paint with PVA glue though, and then you'll get a similar effect. So for today I'm using acrylic paint. You'll see that I've got a mix of colours here that I'm planning on using. I've got my dark blue and my deep violet for kind of the shadowy areas, and then I've got sort of my skin tones and creams and a lot of white because I will definitely be needing that for highlights, and sort of my pinks over here. I did mix this pink, so this kind of light sort of fuchsia hue is a mix of this one here and this one here. So you've got sort of a darker pink mixed with a very, very pale baby pink to make this shade. I'm going to pop this to one side so it's out of the way, but I will be using this palette throughout the tutorial, and these are the only colours that I'm going to be using. So to start with, you need to make sure you've got a nice clear workspace. Now, a lot of the sort of edges of this are actually going to be coloured, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some scrap paper underneath it just to save the surface that I'm working on. Okay, so I have set up a big scrap piece of paper just behind my work, just so that when I am working I don't make a mess of my desk. Now I will be going right to the edge of my canvas board, but obviously you don't have to do that. Just to give you an idea of what we're aiming for, your impasto should look something like this once it's dry. So you can see here there is actually a sort of raised texture. Okay, it's nice and thick, and you can see that it is raised off of the page. Now this is what we're aiming for when it's dry, but it does take twice a while to dry, but you can see it's got this really nice sheen to it, and I can actually feel the texture of it. So this is the sort of idea we're aiming for. Obviously this is not necessarily a representative image of a particular object, so this is just sort of a sample piece. We're going to be using this technique to paint our pair of lips. So to start off with, I'm going to start with the lighter colours, not the highlights, because I will add those in after, but kind of the lighter pinks. So I'm going to start with sort of these areas down here on the lips. Now, starting with this, I'm going to need a piece of cardboard or mount board to apply my paint. Now I'm going to get quite a lot of paint onto my mount board, so you can see I've got a decent amount here, and I'm just going to start scraping it onto my canvas board, and I'm not actually sort of rubbing it in, I'm letting it stay nice and thick filling up the shape here and sort of flicking my hand so that it goes quite whippy almost. Almost like the texture of a nice ice cream on a summer's day. I can use the point of my mount board here. But I can also use the flat edge. I'm just carefully applying the paint to this area. So as I'm moving across, I can see here in my image that it actually gets darker near the lower area of the top lip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of pop this piece of mount board, I'm just going to fill in that gap there first. I'm going to put this piece of mount board over onto my palette, and I'm going to grab another piece and get a slightly darker shade of pink. What I'm going to do with this, and I'm going to put it into the areas that I think are darker, but I'm also going to overlap it onto the lighter colour. So you can see here I'm sort of overlapping the two colours together so that they blend in quite an abstract way. And I can see here I've got the curve of the lips, so I need to sort of mark that a little bit on here. And I'm just layering up the colours, so I'm laying down these base colours, and I can add some details and some darker areas and highlights on top of this later. So I'm just going to very quickly lay down these base colours for you in a quick time lapse. So have a look at how the colours are built up across the entire page, and then I will meet you back here for some shadows and highlights. Okay, so you can see here I've laid down the base layers of paint. So I've got some darker areas, but they're not quite the kind of deep shadows that I'm hoping for yet. So I'm going to start now adding in those shadows on the lip areas. So I'm going to use one of my pieces of mount board that I've cut down to sort of almost a pointy shape. And what I'm going to do is use my dark purple and my dark blue, so my violet and my cerulean, and basically just layering up these darker areas, particularly this area between the two lips. So I'm going to start with the purple, and I can follow the sections that I've already added in here. But now I'm going to be using this sort of swooping motion to add in the curve of this line as it sort of blends out into the lips. Now as I'm going along here, I'm flicking and pulling the paint back and forth to give it that sort of 3D texture. I'm constantly adding more paint to the piece of cardboard or mount board that I'm using, so it's nice and thick and we end up with that really lovely whippy texture. As I'm pulling the paint out, I'm actually applying a little bit less pressure to it because I don't want to get rid of that line across the middle. I just want to make it look like it's almost blending outwards. Towards the edges, and then I'm going to come down to the bottom area and do the same, a little bit darker, and then I'm going to use my dark blue as well in a moment to add this shadow underneath the lower lip. So quite a lot of dark blue onto my mount board now. It's really, really dark, and I'm just going to come along the bottom here. Just sort of following the shape. Now, like I said at the beginning, we are not aiming for perfection here. We are aiming for something that is abstract. The point of impasto is that it's nice and thick. It's got a really lovely 3D texture to it. It's something a little bit different and it's very tangible. When you touch it afterwards, it's very much a sort of a 3D painting almost. So I'm just going to thicken up the shadow on this side a little bit because based on the image, this is a bit thicker, sort of a wider shadow underneath the lip there. Okay, now I can start adding in some highlights. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use white. I'm going to start layering in some highlights in these areas that I've left blank. So again, just sort of applying it nice and thickly, whipping it up to sort of blend it into the spaces around. Using almost a circular motion, but very, very tiny circles with my wrist to flick the paint up. And this is a bigger section down here, so I'm going to get much more paint onto my cardboard. So I'm quite happy with how the lips are looking at the moment. I might just add in a little bit more pink here with the white. But I'm quite happy with the overall shape. I quite like how messy it looks. There's definitely a weight to it, and you can see here if I hold it up, it's very 3D. It's definitely coming off of the mount board. Now obviously because of the thickness of the paint it will take a while to dry, but that's absolutely fine. A little bit of highlight up here and along the top there. Okay, so I'm now going to use this same technique with my pieces of cardboard and mount board, and I'm going to do the skin in the outside area. Now I've sketched in where the highlights and things are going to go, so I'm going to do a quick time lapse to show you how I do the skin area. So there we have it, an impasto painting of the lips. So I've got my reference image here. I've been using it throughout to tell me sort of where my shapes are going to be, and then I've layered up the colours and the various different layers of paint to create that 3D texture. Now if I pick it up, it is quite messy, but you can see here it's got quite a lot of texture. You can see the shine of the different thicknesses and layers. It's coming up off of the canvas board. So I'm going to leave this to dry. It is going to take quite a while. I would expect at least a day or two to dry fully. But by the time that it's dry, it should keep that nice natural sheen and be sort of 3D like this sample piece that I showed you earlier. Remember that the point of impasto is to have some fun, get really messy, mix your colours together, use something that isn't necessarily a normal drawing implement. I've used pieces of mount board here, and I've used some smaller pieces of cardboard just cut up into strips, and those are essentially my way of using a palette knife. Okay, it's quite abstract, it's a little bit pop arty because I've gone for quite over the top colours. You could sort of make those a little bit more subtle if you wanted to. So have fun, enjoy. I hope that this was useful, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with. Have a great day. Bye!